Across the street from 24 Dogwood Drive, the big picture window is empty. No one sits looking out today. Bridget has things to do. Last night was the beginning of a whole new life for her. She feels as if she might explode with happiness. And if someone else has to suffer for her to be happy, if someone else has to go to jail for the rest of her life, well, that's the way the cookie crumbles. Life is a zero-sum game, after all. Bridget thinks back to the day it all happened, the day that had changed everything. It started out like any other day on Sleepy Dogwood Drive. She was doing a bit of housework, glancing outside occasionally, when she noticed a strange man poking around the Krupps' house. She turned off the vacuum cleaner and watched him. He mounted the front steps and looked in the window at the top of the door, but she noticed that he didn't knock or ring the bell. He seemed to know that no one was home. There was no car in the driveway. Then he walked around the back. Bridget's curiosity and her indignation were aroused. She wanted to know who he was and what he was doing there. She grabbed her gardening gloves and went out to the bottom of her front yard to tackle the weeds and keep an eye on the man snooping around the Krupps' house. When he reappeared in the front, she stood up and watched him. He waved at her in a friendly way and then walked over to talk to her. "Hi," he said casually. "Hello," Bridget responded stiffly, not about to be won over by a pleasant smile and good looks. She didn't know who this guy was. Maybe he was an insurance adjuster or something and had a perfectly acceptable reason for looking around the Krupps' property. But he didn't look like an insurance adjuster. "Do you live here?" he asked, indicating her own house behind her. "Yeah," she said. "You must know the people across the street," he said, tilting his head at the Krupps' house. She nodded cautiously. "I'm an old friend," he told her, "of the wife." "Oh," Bridget said, not sure she believed him. "From where?" He looked at her, all pleasantness. All pleasantness fell away, and a mean sort of glint came into his eye. "From another life." And then he waved at her dismissively and walked briskly away. The man's demeanor made her feel uneasy. Once he was gone, she returned to the house, thinking about the odd exchange. It made Bridget wonder about Karen. She never seems to talk about her life before she was with Tom, other than saying she was from Wisconsin and that she had no family. And another thing, Karen wasn't online at all. Nothing came up on her. She wasn't even on Facebook. Everybody's on Facebook. Bridget remembered Karen's maiden name from when she and Tom were dating. Karen had changed her name to Krupp after the wedding. Bridget got on the computer and Googled Karen Fairfield. But she didn't get any hits. That wasn't too surprising. But the more she thought about the man, about his "from another life" comment, the more curious she became. That was how Bridget got drawn into the internet sinkhole and started researching how people disappear and turn up in a new life as someone else. It wasn't long before she began to suspect, to convince herself, that Karen might not be who she said she was. That's when she called Tom at his office and arranged to meet him that same night. She wanted to tell him about the strange man and her suspicions about Karen. But that evening, when Bridget was about to leave to meet Tom at their old spot down by the river, she saw Karen peel out of the house in a desperate hurry. And because of the man's odd visit earlier in the day, Bridget followed her. Instead, Tom could wait. She saw what she saw, and now everything is different. She thinks about what happened with Tom the night before, and a languid warmth begins somewhere low and spreads throughout her body. How she's missed him! She hadn't even realized how much until she kissed him again. That kiss, sensuous and dark, was fraught with all sorts of delicious undercurrents and memories. His mouth felt and tasted just like she remembered. Pleasure traveled along her body in a current. That kiss left her breathless. They shared a past, and it was all revived in that kiss. When it was over, he pulled away and looked at her. She could tell that he was blown away by it as she was, and then she'd taken him by the hand and led him upstairs to the bedroom, where they made love in Karen and Tom's bed. The same bed she and Tom used to make love in before Karen moved in. That interloping bitch. Bridget thinks about the lewd things she and Tom did together the night before and feels that glow again. She remembers how afterward a feeling of great power and wickedness had come over her. She propped herself on her elbow, full breasts on display, and looked at Tom lying naked and vulnerable in the bed beside her. She walked her fingers slowly up his leg and said, You don't want to tell me the police what I saw, do you?" He looked at her in fear. "No, there's no mistaking it," she thinks now, the connection they share. Tom loved her once, she's sure of it, and he will love her again. He will be in her thrall once more, like he was before. Tom knows now what Karen has done, and she's a murderer, because Bridget was there and she told him. Bridget has promised Tom that she isn't going to say anything to the police. But Bridget has a plan. There's no going back. It's all going to be perfect. Tom is shaken to his core by the arraignment. It was a circus in that courtroom. Too noisy to hear anything, too much going on, and all of it happening so fast. He'd expected it to be a lot more solemn and easier to follow. Karen went up in front of the bench with Jack Colvin when her name was called. Tom sat in the courtroom fairly far back, the only place he could get a seat. He could only see Karen from behind. The size of the courtroom and the tumult all around made her seem small and defeated. He had to strain to hear. It was all over in a couple of minutes, and then she was being escorted out. He stood up. She glanced back at him, frightened, as they led her out of the courtroom. Tom sat back down in his seat, stunned, unsure of what to do. Calvin saw him and approached. "You might as well go home," he said. "They're transporting her to the county jail. You can see her there later today." So Tom had gone home. He didn't know what else to do. Then he'd called in sick indefinitely. He knows that no one is going to believe he's sick once the news gets out. Now he goes into the bedroom and stares at the rumpled sheets with horror. He should never have slept with Bridget again. How could he have let that happen? He knows how. He was very lonely and very drunk, and she was sympathetic. She could also be irresistibly sexy, and they had all that history. But then afterward, she made it quite clear that sleeping with her had been the price of her silence. Now he feels sick and scared. What if she's lying? What if Bridget hadn't been there at all? Either way, she's manipulating him to get him back into his bed. What if she visits Karen in jail and tells her what he did? If he were to tell Karen that he slept with Bridget to protect her, would she believe him? Tom suddenly rips the sheets off the bed in a rage and throws them in a ball on the floor. He'll put them in the laundry and wash any trace of Bridget from their bed. But getting rid of Bridget, that might not be so simple. Jack Calvin takes a quick flight to Las Vegas, Nevada to visit the counseling center for battered women that Karen used when she was married to Robert Traynor. He's already checked, it's still there, and there are people there who remember her. They're expecting him. He's also hired a private investigator in Las Vegas to look into Robert Traynor's business associates. Maybe something will turn up there, but he's not particularly hopeful. He lands and takes a cab into the city. He soon locates the Open Arms Women's Shelter and Counseling Center. The building is a bit run down, but it's trying hard to be a happy, warm, and welcoming place. There are children's paintings up everywhere. He goes to the information desk. Very soon, the director of the facility comes out to meet him and takes him back to her office. "I'm Teresa Walcake," she says, offering him a seat. "Jack Calvin," he says. "As I told you on the phone, I represent a woman now living in New York State who used to come here for counseling 3 or 4 years ago. It would be now. Georgina Traynor." She nods. "May I see some identification?" "Yes, of course." He reaches for his ID. He also opens his briefcase and hands over a letter that identifies the writer as Georgina Traynor and gives her informed consent to disclose information to her lawyer, Jack Calvin. She pushes her glasses up higher on her nose and reads it. Then she nods briskly. "Okay, how can I help you?" "Well, my client, Georgina Traynor, has been charged with the murder of her husband, Robert Traynor." Teresa looks at him and nods tiredly. And now the law needs her to justify herself. She's accused of killing a man. They need to see justice done. If what she says is true, I don't think a jury will have a very difficult time seeing it from her point of view, that she was frightened for her life. "The counselor who saw your client most regularly is a woman named Stacy Howell. Let me get her for you." Soon Calvin and the counselor are closeted together in a small private office. Stacy, a no-nonsense black woman with a soft voice, brings Georgina Traynor's file with her and opens up immediately when she's read the letter. "I remember her, sure. You would think I wouldn't because I see so many with all the same sad story. But I remember her. Georgina isn't that common a name, and I really liked her. I saw her for at least a year." "What was she like?" "Well, she was like all the other women who come here, scared shitless. Sorry to be so blunt, but nobody seems to get what these women go through. The man she was married to was a real bastard. She felt trapped. She felt that if she told anyone but us what he did to her, nobody would believe her." "So what did you tell her? Did you tell her to leave him?" It's not that simple. We have women living here for their own protection. It's difficult to get the supports in place. The restraining orders don't seem to do that much good." She sighs in discouragement. "I told her she had some leverage. He had a good business. I told her that if she wanted to, she could leave him and get a restraining order and threaten to make it public. Shaming them sometimes works, but she was too afraid." Calvin nods. "One day she didn't show up for her appointment. We heard that she jumped off the Hoover Dam Bridge. They didn't recover her body. I read about it in the paper." She shakes her head sadly, remembering, "I thought for sure that he killed her, and then he tried to make it look like suicide." "Did you go to the police?" "Of course I did. They looked into him, but he had an airtight alibi. He was working. Lots of people saw him throughout the day. They dropped it." "He didn't kill her," Calvin says, indicating the letter. "No, she got away after all. Good for her. But now she's facing a murder charge." "She killed him?" Stacy says with surprise. She puffs air sharply out her nose. "He had it coming, the son of a bitch." And then she looked at him in distress and said, What's going to happen to her?